Welcome to Gallery Al-Quds at the Jerusalem Fund in Washington, D.C. Today we're having a chat with artist Doris Bittar, who's come from San Diego for the opening of her exhibition, Cryptographic, which will be at the gallery from September 25th through October 30th. Doris, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to ask you, as we have a look at all of the different pieces that you've brought, we know that this is all new work, and we're privileged to have it at our gallery today. Could you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this particular exhibition?
Sure. I think it culminates the work I've been doing for 25 years or so, which is to investigate pattern and decoration at the intersection of history and see where they intersect and what could be sort of discovered in that area. I also see pattern as a structure, a kind of lattice with which to find themes, historical themes, particularly about the Middle East and Europe, to investigate, really. You know, so it's like a format for me that I can probe my own curiosities, ask questions, not necessarily have answers, but be able to kind of navigate in that world.
Your work here today is comprised of both paintings and constructions, some of which are made with multi-layers of cut paper. And they have some very intriguing names. Could you talk about, for example, one of the pieces in the series, Encoded Histories?
Sure. The reason I use words like encoded or encrypted is that I find that through my research on pattern, that pattern is shared by various cultures. It doesn't have national boundaries where the pattern stops. So it layers over and blends into various cultures. Its sources, the sources of Islamic pattern, are Byzantine and China and the large civilizations that were there, and they're tribal, and those are the sources of Islamic culture, even though it looks very distinct. In fact, it has many sources. And so I'm looking at those patterns that I find to be shared by many cultures, especially Byzantine or Chinese, and they're very Arab as well, but also have a contemporary, a kind of vague contemporary feel. Almost like you know, pop art or op art, let's say, and other sorts of things. And I want to, in the past, I've focused on the colonial issues and issues of identity. So this time, I want to start with the pattern and then kind of in a very free way find images that may work with that, whether it's a map, whether it's other patterns, a kind of conversation. So I would say this series, these are like the beginning of a series that I think in which the pieces will get larger, but I want to do a whole bunch of littler ones and investigate the idea of diagrams, graphs, patterns, maps, decorative elements, and see what I come to. Now, I said I'm not going to go into Middle Eastern themes, but of course I do, because the patterns have a certain ambiguity to them, you know, and I'm interested in that ambiguity, you know. Where does it intersect? What are the shared values? As well, I've been saying for years that pattern offers a kind of structure for decorum. And I mean decoration, but I also mean a way of speaking. And so part of what I believe about pattern's power is that it can create a situation where you can have a difficult conversation in a decorous, cordial way, you know, so that you're able to discuss some difficult areas.
Finally, I know that you are not only a practicing and exhibiting artist, but also a professor of art in San Diego. Tell us a little bit about how you teach students at the university there, and whether your Middle East background informs some of the teachings that you do in your classroom work.
Okay, that's a complicated answer, so I'll try to get it out succinctly. basically what I've noticed recently is that my professors leaned heavily on modernism to teach us. They didn't particularly like modernism, but they leaned on it really heavily. And my feelings about modernism is I like some of it, I don't like others of it, but it was just a great tool to think more expansively. You know, before modernism, at least in Europe, and that kind of rigid way that was developed to teach art, you know, you needed a way to allow students to create something individual, not rote. And so modernism provided that kind of incredible broad diversity for us. At the same time, modernism was the period in European history which coincided with the colonial era. So I thought, okay, here I am, I went to art school, I had like 3 different kinds of education in my art career, you know, from an American, but also like a Bauhaus, Yale University, and a New York school, and then what was happening on the West Coast, which is more conceptual. And everyone used modernism as a crutch, and they didn't like them. You know, people don't really like Cézanne, but he's so important, you know, or Picasso, or we're way ahead of that, we're more conceptual. But, and so I was just really, and I was doing that with my students when I teach. I did the same thing, but I said, but Doris, you know, step back a little bit. You also have this colonial history with these masters, when the world was their oyster. And, you know, and I sort of put it through the filter of Edward Said and, you know, various investigations like that. And so when I teach my students about modernism, I have to bring in the fact that it coincides with colonialism, European colonialism. And I try to show them as many women as possible, because that was excluded from my education. There were women all over the place, and strong art. And so I try to show it through that filter. I mean, I also bring in, I'm in San Diego, so I bring in the Border Arts workshop there, the conceptualism of Southern California, and you know, to give them this more holistic view, and also tell them, yeah, these patterns are Middle Eastern, but they come from somewhere else too, and they were synthesized by Islamic, the Islamicate, right? The governments and the people that were brought together. So that's how I discuss it with them.
Great. Well, I wish that you could come and teach a couple of classes here in Washington, but we're grateful you're here for the exhibition. Thank you so much, Doris.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.